This is the sixth Sunday of Easter. And on this sixth Sunday, we come to the text, the gospel lesson from John chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there was a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take up your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So many years ago, I was driving my son Matt, then 5 years old, back home from preschool. And he wanted to hear some stories about when I was his age. And one of his favorite stories that he enjoyed hearing me tell was the time I almost choked on a peppermint candy in the back seat of my parents' car when I was about his age. He loved hearing about my gut-wrenching brush with death, as I told it anyway. I mean, I grew up in suburban Los Angeles, so that was about the most exciting and thrilling story I could come up with during my growing up years. So I told it with as much drama as I could possibly tell it. I was in the back seat of my parents' car on the way home from a restaurant where they gave out those menacing round red and white peppermint candies. It was El Charro's in Montrose, the only place my family ever went to dinner once every blue moon. I was working away on that candy in the back seat when all of a sudden it accidentally slipped down my throat, it got stuck, and I started to gag. My brother and sister were there with me and just stared at me in disbelief, offering no help at all. I tell them I think they were rooting for the candy. My dad, with amazing swiftness, pulled the car over to the curb, opened his door, ran around to the other side, grabbed me out of the back seat. Fortunately, he didn't have to waste time unbuckling my seatbelt, since there were no seatbelts back then. And he quickly stuck his finger down my throat, also pre-Heimlich maneuver, I'm thinking, and successfully dislodged the candy, and I was rescued. That was it. That's the whole story. Amazing, isn't it? Well, Matt sat there in silence for a few moments. I thought he was probably pondering the amazement of this intense near-death experience. And after a few moments of silence, he said to me, "You know, Dad, that little boy is still in you." I wasn't sure I heard him correctly, so I said, "What was that?" He says, "That little boy, he's still in you, you know." I almost drove the car off the road. I remember thinking at the time, if it's true that little boy is still in there, I wasn't sure where he was. I could hardly remember him. I was in my 30s, buried under all my adult responsibilities at the time, with 4 kids, a pretty demanding job, a mortgage, daily living, and I hadn't thought about that little boy in quite some time. So our text this morning, as I read it anyway, struck me as a story about our freedom to dream, the way little boys and little girls dream. Filled with possibility during those earliest years. Our hearts explore all of the many things we will one day do with our lives or one day hope to do with our lives. And I think Matt was right. I think that little boy and that little girl really is still inside of us. Somewhere. Calling to us for attention. So Jesus went to this festival in Jerusalem. It doesn't say which festival. There were three possibilities. It could have been Passover or Pentecost or Tabernacles. Each one of them would have included a pilgrimage. But Jesus was there in Jerusalem. And he's near the sheep gate, it says. And of course the sheep gate, you may or may not know, was the gate through which the lambs and the sheep would enter in to go to the temple to be sacrificed. So immediately, if you're aware of these gates as they would have been back then, it would have symbolized this idea of grace and love and forgiveness. And there he sees this man lying under one of the porticos by a series of pools in an area called Bethsaida, who had been there for 38 years. Some think that this place could have been the ritual baths for what they call an Asclepion. In Greek mythology, there was a god named Asclepius, who was the hero and the god of medicine. And Asclepion was an ancient healing temple, sacred to the god Asclepius. And these healing temples were places in which patients would go, and they would sit there by the waters, and in an effort to receive some kind of treatment or some kind of healing. But this particular place were the ritual baths, some think, as part of the process of calling upon Asclepius for healing. And sometimes they would spend several nights there in the temple and wait for him to appear and to make him well. So some think truly that this was maybe part of the backdrop for what's going on in the story. Clearly some additional beliefs or rituals or superstitions sort of began to build up around it. In fact, there's an additional verse that is there in later manuscripts that's actually not, probably wouldn't be in your translation, but there's a later verse that sort of clarifies a little bit. It says, "For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well from whatever disease that person had." So in some ways, this later scribe thought there was some clarification needed, and maybe he even sort of sanitized it a little bit by making it the angel of the Lord that stirred up the waters rather than Asclepion. No one knows for sure, but it's not there in the earliest manuscripts. But like all Greek mythology, the gods were quite stingy with their blessings. I mean, you had to meet certain conditions, certain arbitrary kinds of conditions, or you wouldn't get the blessing. And in this case, only one would get healed. If you couldn't make it into the water fast enough, tough luck. Try again, wait around, maybe next time. So all these people were gathered around the pools. And so Jesus goes to this man who's lived under the spell of this magical thinking for some 38 years, waiting for his miracle, waiting for the gods to be nice to him, and asks him a question. Most think he was probably partially paralyzed from the context. Jesus asks him a question. "Do you want to be made well?" He comes and asks. And what's interesting here is the man doesn't answer the question. You notice? Instead he says, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." So instead of answering Jesus' question, he just makes some pretty good excuses. He explains his dilemma. I have no one to put me in the water. He expresses his frustration. A little bit of bitterness you can kind of hear in his statement. Even some resentment and anger, maybe even some self-pity. People get in ahead of me. What am I supposed to do? By not answering Jesus' question, he is sort of in effect saying, does this even really matter what I want? I mean, really, it's not going to happen anyway. What's the point? What's the point of dreaming if I'm not going to get it? If I know I'm not going to get it? So the guy just skips right to the reasons why this isn't going to happen. I can't meet the requirements. We don't think that way when we're children, do we? We didn't evaluate our dreams on the basis of their attainability. And if anybody was wise, there were no adults that came up to us when we were wanting to be president of the United States or, wanting to fly to the moon or and say, that's not going to happen. We were full of energy and enthusiasm, and the world was before us. It was a time when dreams were expressed and explored and visualized, not evaluated. But as we got older, we got real. Right? We stopped talking about our dreams in that way. Because we got afraid, maybe, what other people would think if they heard about our dreams. How stupid they might sound, or even maybe how stupid they might sound to us. Instead, we felt it was more important to be practical or realistic. Don't be dumb. Don't be ridiculous. And maybe someone actually made us feel that way. Possibly. It said that when you're 18, you're worried about what other people think about you. At 50, you try not to care what other people think about you. And by the time you're 70, you realize that no one has been thinking about you at all along. They're too busy trying to figure out their own lives. Sometimes we don't even learn that by the time we're 70, but what a nice discovery at any age. How quickly we settle for what is, rather than reach for what might be, or what could be. So the man settled for 38 years. He couldn't even admit what he wanted. He couldn't even say it out loud. He couldn't even acknowledge what his dream was. He had so lost possibility. His paralysis, I think, was a metaphor as it was physical. Excuses do that. They just paralyze us. And the better the excuse, the more they paralyze us. The more reasonable the excuse, the more they take the energy right out from under us. We end up stuck, lying on a mat, unable to even articulate our hopes and dreams, unable to even put them into words. Well, Jesus won't play the game. He won't play the superstition game. He won't play the magic game. He won't play the religion game. I love the way that the whole story ends. And it was the Sabbath. Here's Jesus, who's just completely shattering the religious games by healing the man on the Sabbath. He wouldn't play that game. He wouldn't play the rub a rabbit's foot game of religion. He wouldn't play the win the lottery game. He wouldn't play that game. For 38 years, this man has been lying on his mat, blaming his circumstances, good excuses, waiting for his miracle, bitter that the odds were stacked against him, bitter that this is not even going to be possible, bitter that it's not going to work out for me. And Jesus bypasses all the superstition and all the magic and all the complaining and good excuses and just looks him right in the eye and says, stand up. Stand up. Pick up your mat and walk. Only one thing will bring change in our lives. Only one thing will move us toward the life we are wanting to live. Only one thing. And that is if we're willing to trust God enough to stand up, pick up our mat, and walk. You want to get well? Jesus asked him. What's your dream? And Jesus says, stand up. The message is simple. And it's coming from Jesus. Here's what trusting God looks like. Know what you want and get moving. Know what you want and get moving. Are all paths open to us? Well, probably not. But what do you want? What paths are open to you? What possibilities are there for you? Know what you want. I love a title to Brian McLaren's book on spiritual formation called We Make the Road by Walking. That's a great title. We make the road by walking. The promise is that God is at work within us to will and to work for His good pleasure. The path appears as we get up and walk toward our dream. The translation, another translation puts it this way. For it is God who is working in you, enabling you both to desire and to work out His good pleasure. Proverbs 3 says, trust in the Lord and the desires of your heart. He says, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. It does not say, and He will pick you up, and He will carry you along the path and take you where you want to go. Didn't say that. Or He will help us get in the water ahead of all those other competitors. He will help us meet the religious obligations or the superstitious requirement. Or He will make your dreams magically appear if you're just a really good person and really, really sincere and you just deserve it. Didn't say that. Even that common command that we often hear, wait on the Lord. I think that means sit on a mat. Listen to Isaiah 40. You tell me what it means. But they that wait upon the Lord shall sit on their mat for as long as it takes. For they that wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Waiting on the Lord is not passive. From our very beginning, from the time of our first awareness, we have all been made unique and special with a wide array of interests and dreams. And those interests and dreams continue to develop throughout our whole life, at all ages, by the way. And we have the ability to articulate those dreams and move forward toward them. We have a God who believes in us, who has no interest in manipulating us or messing with us. In fact, He refuses to do that, to play that game. But tells us instead that we are capable and we are valuable and we are needed. And whatever is in your heart, the world needs. Writer and researcher Brene Brown wrote a best-selling book called Daring Greatly. Her title comes from a quote by a speech by Teddy Roosevelt given in Paris in 1910 at the then University of Paris. And it's a very famous speech. It's become known as the Man in the Arena speech. You may have heard of it. Here's the little clip from it where the title or that phrase was taken. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms and great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never know victory nor defeat. God gives us everything we need as a gift and invites us to act on it and live it, believing that there are 1,000 ways to move toward what is in your heart. Our dreams and desires need not be impressive to anybody else. What's in our heart it doesn't even make it on the 6 o'clock news. They just need to be important and amazing to us. Faith is not lying on our mats for 38 years, wishing our dreams would magically come true when God decides to smile on us or stir the waters or when we meet the certain magical requirements. God is already smiling on us, the gospel tells us. God has already called us acceptable and valuable and capable. He now just says, believe it. Stand up. Pick up your mat and walk. Dare to dream. Dare to dream greatly. It's a big part of what the resurrection is about. The freedom to dream. The freedom to not let anything get in our way. Jesus didn't even let death get in his way to reach his dream for you. We face hardship and we get up again. We fail and we keep moving. We believe big, we dream big, and we act with courage and confidence and resolve. And we remember, like Matt said that day, the little boy and the little girl is still in you, you know. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.